كوني العظيم يبارككم شبابنا، شباب الضوء السلم واليوم وكل يوم خير الأكوان محبة الأكوان. هذه الحلقة رقم 1451 الجزء الأول منها، ونبدأها نقول نحن أمام تغيرات كبيرة وعظيمة ورائعة حقيقة. الأكوان تنفتح إيجابيا وتغيرات نشهدها من جوانب روحية وفلسفية تمس مصيرنا كحضارة بشرية في كل لحظة. أخي وأختي، عليك أنك تعيش هذه حياتك، تعيشها وتعرف أن فكرك هو خالق الحياة العظيمة. نريد أن نقول شيء الذي يوقف الإنسان هي الحواجز النفسية. هذه وضعت علينا، فقد تم تحريف التاريخ كاملا حقيقة. وضعوا معلومات ووثائق وعلوم خاطئة. وأنا أعد هذه المحاضرة شباب أفكر فيما يقوله ويليام تومبكنس، وسوف نتناول أمور مهمة يوضحها هو، وأيضا سوف نعرض فيديوهات مهمة في هذه المحاضرة. ففي هذه المقابلة مع كيري كاسيدي يقول لها أنه خلال 6000 سنة قد تم تحريف كل العلوم، يقول حتى الرياضيات، فهي غير صحيحة. كل الذي يدرسوه، هذا كلامه، كل الذي يدرسوه في الجامعات والمؤسسات هي علوم غير صحيحة. نعرض الفيديو الأول في نهاية المحاضرة. فيقول تزويد، أكرر، تزويد معلومات غير صحيحة أو تحريف المعلومات كانت مدارة من قبل الدراكونيان والربتيليان. يقول على حد تعبيره كل كتاب في كل جامعة فيه معلومات غير صحيحة وفي كل مجال. ويليام تومبكنس هو عمل في المشاريع السرية التي تخص التكنولوجيا الكونية منذ فترة الخمسينيات من القرن الماضي، ووضحنا في الحلقة 1450 هذه الشركات تقوم بصناعة مركبات كونية بهذا المصطلح، بصناعة بشرية معدلة محورة. هذه المركبات الكونية المعدلة أو المحورة يتم صناعتها من مركبات كونية حقيقية كان قد تم إسقاطها، وراح نوضح أيضا معلومات أكثر حول هذا الأمر. فالمصطلح الذي يستخدم في مثل هذه الصناعات يسمى بالريفيرس انجينيرينج. فيأتون بالمركبة الكونية يسقطوها أو بعد إسقاطها، تمام، يدرسوها ويأتون طبعا بخبراء، اي نعم، خبراء وفيزيائيين. حتى هم بدأوا المشاريع بدأوها بخبراء من ألمانيا النازية، تعرفون هذه بالأربعينيات بدأت هذه المشاريع، ويبدأون يطورون مركبات كونية نقول معدلة محورة اللي هي تسمى بالريفيرس انجينيرينج. اوكي، حتى يكشف في هذه اللقاءات، لقاءاته مع كيري كاسيدي، نقصد مشاريع النازيين في ذلك الوقت في بناء مركبات كونية معدلة. هم بدأوها النازيين منذ ممكن الأربعينيات أو حتى ممكن قبل الأربعينيات، بس هو يقول في الأربعينيات، أعتقد في الأربعينيات كونوا أو صمموا ما يعادل من 12 إلى 14 نوع مركبة كونية معدلة. وقد شوي نصلح هذا، وقد تم تحويل أو نقل، هذا كلامه، 90% منها إلى الانتاركتيكا. تصوروا، يسي، حتى يوضح وجود مراكز إلى الآن لنازيين ألمان في الانتاركتيكا. وحتى أيضا يقول في اللقاء حتى مشاريع القمر مثل مهمات أبولو، فغايتها هي في بناء مراكز ووحدات ومشاريع تنقيب هناك في القمر. هناك شيء نريد أن نوضحه هنا. هو يقول أن يعني هذه المشاريع السرية وقسم من الشركات التي تديرها شركة دوغلاس، هاي جدا معروفة شركة دوغلاس. هذه الشركة هي التي تقوم بتصنيع تكنولوجيا كونية محاورة أو معدلة. فيقول راح نوضح هذا. يعملون نورديك. نورديك هذا المصطلح، عندما تسمعون نورديك يعني هذه كائنات كونية، هي من سلالات البليديان. يقول في هذه الشركة، شركة دوغلاس، يعملون من النورديك، من هاي الكائنات الكونية، سيدتين ورجل، لكن هم لم يقولوا أبدا نحن نورديك. وبعدها يستمر ويليام تومبكنس يقول: وأنا أشعر هم يتصلون معي بالتليباثي ويوجهونني. وهو يقول يعني أثناء اللقاء أنه يعني هو على اتصال، أو كان على اتصال مستمر مع النورديك. وأيضا يوضح وجودهم من أجل تقليل تأثير الدراكونيين. You see؟ أي. الفيديو 2، نعرض الفيديو الثاني الآن. هذا يستمر يقول: هناك 6 أشخاص من النورديك، هؤلاء يعملون في شركة لوكهيد. أيضا هاي شركة أخرى هي تقوم بالإشراف وصناعة التكنولوجيا الكونية المعدلة. وهو أيضا ويليام تومكنز عمل هناك في شركة لوكهيد. لوكهيد هكذا تلفظ. فهؤلاء النورديك ال6 يقول لديهم عوائل وأطفال، وأطفالهم في مدارس هنا في الأرض. حتى يقول: لكن عندما أطفالهم يتعلمون هنا في المدارس، فكل مرة لديهم درس في المدرسة، فهم الأطفال، أطفال النورديك، فهم لا يأخذون المعلومات المدرسية، بل يأخذون المعلومات الخاصة بهم، لأن عوائلهم الكونية تتصل بهم عن طريق التليباثي. يعني وهم بالمدرسة يدرسون، نقول الحصص الدراسية بالأرض، عوائلهم الكونية كأنه تدرسهم عن طريق التليباثي. أيضا يقول هذه العوائل الواحد منهم يعيش بمقدار 3700 سنة. ويقول أطفالهم يستطيعون إنهاء الدراسة الجامعية وهم بعمر 9 سنوات. فهذا الفيديو 2 سوف تشاهدون ويليام تومكنز يتحدث هو مع كيري كاسيد، نفس المقابلة، حول وجود كائنات النورديك. هنا نستنتج شبابنا، يعني نفهم من هذا وجود النورديك بهاي المشاريع السرية موجودين. كأنه، لاحظوا كلمة كأنه، تدخل إيجابي من النورديك ومراقبة الأحداث. أنا أعتقد أنهم هم يتواجدون ضمن مجتمعات وهيئات ومؤسسات أي هكذا من أجل توجيه الوعي البشري باتجاه الإيجابية، كأنه هم درسوا تمام الوعي البشري، الحضارة البشرية، وممكن وصلوا إلى استنتاج بأن حضارات كونية يجب أن تكون بهذه المؤسسات، وإلا إذا سابوا المؤسسات حقيقة يعني هكذا يعني ممكن السلبية والفوضى تنتشر بالأرض، وهم لا يسمحوا أبدا. وبالتالي وجود هؤلاء النورديك بالعمل بهاي الشركات السرية حقيقة موجودين من أجل يعني مراقبة الأحداث، مراقبة الظروف، وعدم السماح ممكن للسلبية. هو يقول تقليل تأثير الدراكونيين، بس أنا أيضا أستنتج أنه كانهم يراقبون الظروف ويراقبون الأحداث. حتى هو يقول بالمناسبة، يقول يعني السيدة دائما مبتسمة، يعني هو اللي يتصلون مع 3 أشخاص، تمام، هذا كلام. يقول السيدات دائما يعيشن ابتسامة، أقصد بالتحاورات، بس أكرر هم لم يقولوا أبدا إحنا من النورديك، أبدا ما يقولون. لكن هو يعرف هذا، أنه هذه كائنات هي كائنات كونية. كليفرد ستون أحد الرائدين في العمل. هاي القصة أيضا رائعة، يعني هي مجموعة من الأجزاء المهمة حقيقة مرتبطة بهاي المحاضرة، هاي الجزء الأول منها. فكليفرد ستون أحد الرائدين في العمل على استرجاع وكشف مركبات كونية كان قد تم إسقاطها. وأيضا من خلال عمله ولسنوات عديدة في هذا المجال، قام بمساعدة قسم من الكائنات الكونية على الرجوع لمجتمعاتهم وعوالمهم الكونية. هو لديه اتصالات كونية أيضا، هذا فقط نريد أن نوضح هذا، لديه اتصالات كونية مع كائنات كونية، وواحد من الكائنات الكونية دائما هو يذكره في لقاءاته اسمه، لاحظوا أريد أن أوضح، بحرف الكاف. دائما يقول، يعني ممكن تسمعون لقاءاتي فكورونا هكذا بالكاف، حتى يقول مرة في اللقاء أنه يبدأ بحرف كي، كائن كوني دائما يكون معه، يذكره هذا. قامت بإرشاده وتوضيح له الأمور، كتب كتاب رائع، ولديه كتاب آخر بالمناسبة، يعني مش فقط هذا الكتاب، الكتاب الآخر أيضا كتاب مهم، الكتاب الآخر اسمه يو أوف أو، أعتقد ار ريال، أو نعم أعتقد ار ريال، يو أوف أو ار ريال، هذا كتابه الآخر. بس هذا الكتاب، بالكتاب يوضح يعني موضوع الكشف عن المركبات الكونية التي تم إسقاطها. تمام. اسم الكتاب فقط عيون، هكذا اسم الكتاب، قصة ستون والكشف عن المركبات الكونية التي أسقطت. فهذا جزء من ما جاء بالكتاب. نقرأ: He was willing to come forth to swear to his Almighty God and to the members of Congress that we are not alone. فهو يقسم، تمام، إلى الكون، إلى الرب، إلى الكونغرس، أنه إحنا مش لوحدنا. هناك، يعني هو هذا هاي الأسطر، هناك أيضا كائنات كونية مثلنا تماما، تشبهنا وتعيش حياتنا، ولديهم شعور، feelings، families. تمام. وحتى يوضح يعني أنه ساعد أحد هذه الكائنات، راح نوضح هاي القصة، أخرج كائن من وحدة عسكرية، راح نوضح القصة الآن. تمام. هنا ففي الجزء الثالث من الفيديو الذي تشاهدونه في نهاية هذه المحاضرة، قام بتخليص كائن كوني من وحدة عسكرية. الظرف حدث في نهاية عام 1969. الفيديو الثالث، كليفرد ستون يتحدث حول إنقاذه لكائن كوني وإخراجه من وحدة عسكرية. فنقرأ أحداث القصة في المقابلة، هذه في المقابلة هنا بهذا الفيديو. يتحدث حول هذا الظرف التالي: طلبوه، هناك وحدة عسكرية اتصلوا مع كليفرد ستون وطلبوه من أجل الاستفسار وأخذ معلومات أكثر حول هذا الكائن والتحدث معه، لأن هذا الكائن يقول بالمقابلة لا يتكلم مع ضباط الوحدة العسكرية هناك، ولهذا استدعوا كليفرد ستون. وصل إلى هذه الوحدة العسكرية التي هي في فرجينيا كما يقول، وعندما وصل إلى الوحدة العسكرية هناك الإجراءات التي يؤدوها، مثلا يقومون بتفتيشه، إزالة إذا يحمل سلاح أو أشياء أخرى وهكذا. بعدها يتجه إلى طابق آخر ويجتاز ممرات وغرف من هنا وهناك إلى أن يصل إلى القاعة التي فيها هذا الكائن. وهذا الموقف مبكي حقيقة، حتى هو من يوضحه كأنه كليفرد يبكي في داخله حقيقة عندما تشاهدون الفيديو، مؤثر جدا. فهو يقول في المقابل أن هذا الكائن وجده جالس أمام مائدة وواضع رأسه عليها، حاني رأسه عليها. You see؟ كليفرد ستون يتصل معه بالتليباثي، رفع رأسه الكائن ببطء. لاحظوا، يقول الكائن الكوني له: أنا خائف. يقول كليفرد ستون في اللقاء، وصوت كليفرد مؤثر جدا وهو يصف ظرف الكائن الكوني حقيقة. You see؟ فعندما قال له الكائن أنا خائف، يقول: أنا شعرت بكل مشاعر هذا الخوف الذي يعيشه هذا الكائن. أكرر، يعني في لقاء مبكي ومؤثر حقيقة. أيضا كليفرد ستون تأثر كثيرا، قال له: اطمئن، هم لا يؤذوك. الكائن الكوني يجيب، قال: أنا مثلكم، أنا أيضا كائن لدي عائلة. هذا حوار، يعني كليفرد ستون أمام هذا الكائن الكوني في وحدة عسكرية. فالكائن الكوني يقول: أنا مثلكم، أنا أيضا كائن لدي عائلة، وأنا أفتقد عائلتي، لدي أطفال، لدي أصدقاء، لدينا هناك حياة نعيشها مثلكم. يستمر ويقول الكائن له: إذا بقيت هنا فأعيش هنا مثل الأسير أو المحجوز. فكليفر ستون يقول له: أنت لست أسير، أنت ضيف هنا. الكائن الكوني يقول: كلا. هذه إجابة الكائن الكوني: إذا حاولت أن أخرج من هنا فرفاقك سوف لا يترددون من إصابتي. أيضا يستمر الكائن الكوني يقول: أنا أعرف أن رفاقي، يعني يقصد رفاق الكائن الكوني، يقول: أنا أعرف أن رفاقي إذا يريدون إخراجي من هنا فهم يأتون إلي، ولكن بإخراجي من هنا فبالتالي ممكن أن تحدث إصابات إلى رفاقك هنا، وأنا لاحظ الكائن ما بيريد هذا أن يحدث، يقول: أنا لا أريد هذا أن يحدث. والكائن يقول: إذا بقيت هنا فرفاقك هم يرونني أنني مجرد كائن من نوع حيواني، وممكن أنهم لا يترددون من إنهاء حياتي. كليفر ستون تأثر كثيرا بأحاسيس وعواطف الكائن، ويقرر إخراجه من هذه الوحدة العسكرية ومهما كلف الثمن. يتحدث كليفر ستون يتحدث إلى شخص آخر يرافقه، يقول اسمه أو يطلقون عليه اسم مارتن. أوكي، يوضح له الأمور ويقول: أحاول أن أقنعه، حتى يقول باللقاء أخذ وقت، يعني هو من أجل أن يقنعه بإخراج الكائن من هذا المكان، يقنعه بالنهاية. وبهذه الغرفة معهم شخص آخر أيضا، يقومون بقص بعض الأسلاك من الأبواب. يقول كليفر ستون بالمقابل أن الأبواب لم تكن مقفلة أو مغلقة، ويبدأون بالخروج من هذا المكان والكائن الكوني معهم. الكائن الكوني وأثناء الخروج يقول لي كليفرد إنه أيضا هو مهتم بكليفرد. فالكائن الكوني يتساءل كيف أن كليفر ستون سوف يتصرف إذا الكائن ذهب أو خرج من هنا. كليفر يجيبه ويقول له: لا تكترث علي، أنت فقط عليك الآن أن تخرج من هنا. عرف الضباط الآخرين المشرفين على مراقبة هذه الغرف. أنا هنا أقرأ. فالضباط الآخرين يراقبون، عرفوا بهذا الوضع بأن كليفر والكائن هناك والأشخاص الآخرين شخصين معهم يخرجون من الباب الخلفي. قاموا بحمل السلاح وملاحقة كليفر ستون والكائن، مع الصياح عليهم أن يتوقفوا أو يرموهم بالطلقات. لكن كليفر ستون هذا كلامه يقول: أنا كنت أصر أنه حتى لو تنتهي حياتي، يقول يجب أن أخرج هذا الكائن من هذا المكان ومهما كلف الثمن. نجحوا في الخروج، ويقول كليفر ستون: يجدون أن المكان في الخارج كله قد أضيء بتنوير كبير، لكنه لم يجد مركبة كونية. والكائن بعدها، وكما يقول كليفر، يقول باللغة الإنجليزية gone، بمعنى ذهب. الكائن الكوني خلاص ذهب، يعني هم سحبوه أخذوه للمركبة الكونية، بس هي المركبة الكونية مش موجودة بالمادة لنا، فقط أريد أن أوضح. فهو عندما يقول gone يعني ذهب، هم سحبوه أصلا، راح. مسكوا كليفرد وضعوه على الأرض، وقال له الكولونيل هنا بالمقابل: أنا لا أعرف أي كولونيل يقصد على العموم. سأله: لماذا تعمل هذا العمل؟ قال لهم أو قال له: أنتم قلتم إنه ضيف. وحدثت، تسمعوها بالمقابل، بعض المناقشات بينهم، ووضح لهم أنهم يقصد الكائنات الكونية. يصلح هذا. أوكي، هم كائنات بشرية مثلنا. ثم أطلقوا سراحه بعدها. وأعتقد كل شخص عندما يشاهد هذا الفيديو سوف يبكي حقيقة، لأنه فيه أعلى معاني الأحاسيس والعواطف، في كم أن هناك ترابط بيننا كأرواح نفكر الواحد بالآخر. فهذا الموقف العظيم من كليفرد هو رسالة لكل شعوب الأرض بمعرفة أن هذه الكائنات لها عواطف وأحاسيس ولديهم حياة اجتماعية مثلنا تماما. أقول يا شبابنا، هذه رسالة. أيضا شاركوا هذا الفيديو، حقيقة هذا الفيديو مهم، يعني الموضوع في هذا الفيديو يمسنا كلنا. فهذه الكائنات آتين إلى الأرض لكي ينقذوننا، لكي يوضحوا لنا أن الحضارة البشرية عليها أن تتوقف عن الصراعات والنزاعات. رسالتهم إلى الحضارة البشرية على أن تتوقف عن بناء مفاعلات وأسلحة نووية، لأن هذا يؤدي لانقراضها، وهذا السبب الرئيسي هم لماذا أتوا. وهذا يؤثر على حياة باقي الكائنات الكونية التي تعيش في كواكب أخرى. هذه الكائنات تعيش تطور تكنولوجي وروحي وفكري عالي، وهي تنظم وتدير سلوك الكواكب والمجتمعات التي تعيش ضمن هذه الكواكب. فهذه هي مهمتها وعملها، وهي تأخذ إرشادات وتوجيهات من جهات أعلى منها. وهذه الجهات الكونية شباب فيها تسلسلية صعودا إلى أعماق الأكوان، إلى أن نصل إلى زعماء وزعيمات المجرات والأكوان، كلها مرتبطة الواحدة بالأخرى. هذه الكائنات الكونية كلها تعيش بتكنولوجيات وروحانيات عالية جدا وبوعي إيجابي عالي جدا. هدفها ومهمتها ورسالتها أنها تقوم بتطوير الأكوان والحفاظ عليها، الحفاظ على استمرارية الحياة فيها. فغير صحيح، جدا غير صحيح، معاملة هذه الكائنات التي تزور الأرض تزورها بمهمات إشراف وحماية، أنهم يتعرضون إلى التوقيف أو الأسر. أصحاب الدولة العميقة يغيرون القصص، يقومون بإسقاط هذه المركبات الكونية، يخفون هذه الأمور، يأخذون هذه المركبات الكونية إلى مصانعهم السرية يدرسوها من أجل أنهم يقوموا بتطوير تكنولوجيات كونية معدلة محورة شبيهة لهذه التكنولوجيات الكونية الحقيقية، يستخدموها بعدها في الانتفاع الشخصي ولحماية مصالحهم، وقسم منها يحولوها إلى روبوتات وأجهزة في السيطرة على شعوب الأرض، بل حتى يستخدموها ضد الكائنات الكونية الأخرى. فالكائنات الكونية بدأت تفكر بهذا الأمر، وهذا الذي أدى إلى أن هذه الكائنات تفكر جديا بالأمر، أنه إذا توسع الأمر فهذا قد يؤدي إلى تجاوز هذه المجتمعات السرية على الكواكب الأخرى. لهذا يجب أن يضعوا حد إلى هذه التجاوزات. هناك الفيديو الرابع سأله صحفي في نفس اللقاء، يعني بس بمقطع آخر: ما هي الرسالة التي تحملها لنا؟ يعني وماذا عرف من هذه الاتصالات الكونية؟ يسأله الصحفي: من خلال اتصالك بهذه الكائنات الكونية، وماذا تقول إلى الأجيال القادمة التي سوف تتعرف على هذه الكائنات الكونية؟ فيجيب كليفورد التالي، يقول: يجب، هذا كلامه، يجب أن لا نخاف من هذه المركبات الكونية، يجب علينا أن نتعلم أكثر، وكلما نتعلم أكثر سوف نعرف أنه لدينا تشابه وتقارب فيما بيننا كحضارة بشرية. نحن لسنا مختلفين، نحن حضارة واحدة. هو يقصد علينا نحن البشر، نحن مش مختلفين، نحن حضارة واحدة. والموقف هو أنه، هذا كلامه، يجب أن لا نخاف من المركبات الكونية. أيضا هو يقصد الكائنات الكونية. يقول: واليوم الذي فيه يكون مقبول ومعروف التواصل مع الكائنات الكونية وعلى المستوى الشخصي، فهذا يوم عظيم ويفتح لنا عالم جديد يقود إلى مستقبل مشرق. تلاحظون هذا فيديو آخر، يعني يلتقي بشخص آخر يعمل معاه مقابلة، يوضح كشفي لمركبة كونية بطول من 25 إلى 30 قدم، ويوضح فيها أيضا شخصية الكائنات الكونية، 3 كائنات كونية. يوضح أيضا عواطف الكائنات الكونية وهي بعيدة عن عوائلها ومجتمعاتها. أيضا نعرض هذا الفيديو الخامس. خلال بحوثي في إعداد هاي المحاضرة شباب، وجدت أيضا هناك تأخر كبير في وعي الهيئات العسكرية، حيث يتم إسقاط هذه المركبات الكونية، ثم نجد أن الجنود يذهبون إلى مكان سقوط هذه المركبات الكونية بأسلحة. الكائنات الكونية ما عندهم أسلحة، تعرفون؟ والحضارة البشرية الجنود ذاهبين بأسلحة ومعدات عسكرية، بل قسم منهم من الجنود قام بإصابة كائنات كونية تخرج من المركبات الكونية تتجه إلى الصحراء، وقسم منها توفي من جراء رمي طلقات نارية باتجاههم، وهي كائنات ما عندها أسلحة. ما عندهم. قسم من هذه الكائنات، قسم منهم بعد سقوط المركبة الكونية مات بفترة قصيرة أو طويلة بعد الحادثة، وقسم منهم يجدوه ميت عند الكشف عن المركبة الكونية أو المركبات الكونية. بعدها أيضا يتم لف وإخفاء حالات سقوط هذه المركبات الكونية. تقوم أقسام المخابرات من البنتاغون والكي جي بي، لأن حدثت أيضا في قديما يسموه الاتحاد السوفيتي نفس الشيء، يعني يخفون هذه حالات سقوط المركبات الكونية، ويطلبون من المدنيين الذين يشاهدون سقوط هذه المركبات الكونية، ويطلبون حتى من المدنيين الذين يكونون موجودين بعد سقوط المركبات الكونية لكنهم بدأوا يعرفون أو يعلمون حول سقوط المركبات الكونية في هذه الأمكنة، فهذه أجهزة المخابرات تطلب من هؤلاء المدنيين بعدم التكلم أو الإفصاح حول هذا الأمر، بل أن قسم من المدنيين حتى تعرضوا أو يتعرضون إلى التهديد أيضا. بعد وصول العسكر إلى هذه المناطق يتم الكشف عن المركبة الكونية والكشف عن الكائنات الكونية التي تكون أما تكون باقية على قيد الحياة، أو قسم منها نقول بالمفهوم المادي مات، يتم نقلها بعدها إلى مراكز سرية لفحصها ودراستها. ثم تقوم المخابرات بالطلب من المدنيين بعدم قول أي شيء حول هذه الظهورات أو السقوطات. قسم من المدنيين يتعرض إلى الرشوة المادية والإغراء المالي، وقسم يتعرض إلى التهديد والابتزاز يقولوه المدنيين في مقابلات يعني. الفيديو السادس شباب، نعرض مؤتمر يوضحون فيها بصور وبتصاميم تاريخ سقوط هذه المركبات الكونية والأحداث التي ترافق هذا السقوط، أيضا كيف يتم سحبها وجلبها إلى مصانع سرية لدراستها. والفيديو لا يحتاج باعتقادي إلى فهم اللغة الإنجليزية، خاصة أنه مدعوم بصور توضيحية بتصاميم يوضحون الذي حدث لهذه المركبات الكونية. من الأخطاء الكبيرة التي حدثت من هذه الإجراءات أن المشرفين من ضباط وجنود وعسكريين بمراتب متنوعة لا يملكون النظرة الكونية الروحية والفلسفية لمعاني وجود هذه الكائنات في أرضنا. راح نوضح هذا الأمر، يعني ما هي الأحداث التي حدثت هنا. نحن نعرض أيضا بعض الصور والأمور اللي حدثت. فالعسكريين الضباط المشرفين المسؤولين لا يملكون، أكرر، النظرة الكونية الروحية والفلسفية لمعاني وجود هذه الكائنات في أرضنا، وبالتالي فهم يتعاملون من منظور مادي، مع طبعا وجود المصالح السياسية المغلفة بوعي وفكر السيطرة. بل حتى طريقة دراسة المركبات الكونية لا تتم أغلبها بطرق صحيحة، وإنما بطرق تقليدية قديمة. مثلا الحادثة التي حدثت عام 1963، هذا يتحدثون فيه في الفيديو. عثروا على هذه المركبة طولها صلح هذا معلش ما يقارب 40 قدم، وبدأوا يستخدمون هذه الأدوات، يريدون أن يدخلون بالمركبة وما يقدرون. استخدموا الليزر بالدخول، هو بالأخير استخدموا الليزر وما قدروا يعني يدخلون بالمركبة. هذا الرسم الحقيقي، هذا الرسم هو رسم حقيقي لشخص كان يراقب الأحداث، رسم هذا السكتش. فهذا الرسم الحقيقي عندما كانت المركبة، هذا شكل المركبة وضعيها بهذا المكان في أحد المصانع، تمام. وهذه الصورة التالية هم قاموا يعني بالمحاضرة، هم عملوا تصاميم 3D ديزاين، بس هي هذه مش الصورة الحقيقية، يعني مش من المصنع، وإنما هم صنعوا أو صمموا تصاميم ثلاثية الأبعاد، يريدون أن يعني يوضحون الظروف التي رافقت يعني من سقوط المركبة إلى أن وصلت إلى هذا المصنع. فهذه وضعية المركبة وما موجود في هذا المكان. شاهدون وهؤلاء عسكريين ماسكين أسلحة. هاي المركبة عندها إحساس بالمناسبة، آتية من أبعاد عليا وعندها فكر، لكن هم يعاملوها كأنها مادة، خطأ. وهذا تصميم آخر من بعد ومن زاوية أخرى، وأعتقد هذا أوضح، يعني يعطي فكرة هيك أعلى إلى الذي يحدث. شاهدوها. ففي الفيديو يذكرون حادثة، هم لم يستطيعوا الدخول داخل هذه المركبة، قاموا بتجريب المواد التالية، استخدموا الدريلز هذه الأولى على اليسار ما نفع، استخدموا الكتر بالمنتصف ما نفع، وجربوا بالأخير الليزر ولم ينفع. في الليزر حدثت الحادثة التالية. ماذا حدث؟ عندما قاموا بتجريب الليزر كما في الصورة، لاحظوا ايش عاملين، آتين بالليزر وكانوا يريدون يحفرون المركبة وما حدث شيء، يعني ما استطاع أن يدخل، لكن حدث. لاحظوا الشعاع باللون الأحمر متجه باتجاه السقف، ماذا حدث؟ وهم يوجهون الليزر باتجاه هذا جزء من المركبة، هناك شعاع من المركبة خرج وضرب السقف. شاهدون؟ هذا يوضحوه في المؤتمر، الفيديو السادس نعرضه كاملا المؤتمر يعني أو المحاضرة. توضيح هنا ما هو السبب؟ لماذا حدث هذا؟ لأن هذا النوع من المركبات صممت وبنيت، المركبات هذه أكرر من أبعاد أعلى، والمواد هذه التي صممت وبنيت منها هذه المركبة طبيعتها وسلوكها أنها لا تنتمي إلى مواد وفيزيائيات البعد الثالث. هذه المركبة وهي تسافر في أعماق الأكوان باستمرار تنشحن بطاقة الضوء. You see؟ أي نعم، هي تتفاعل مع طاقة الضوء. المركبات الكونية والكائنات الكونية والأكوان متحدة هكذا، كان واحد يعرف الآخر، واحد يعرف نوايا الآخر. فهنا هي لا تسمح بهذا العمل، يعني يأتي شخص ويريد يدخل عن طريق توجيه الليزر، ما تسمح. المركبة لها وعي وإحساس، هي لا تقبل هذا، فهذا رد فعلها. وهؤلاء الموظفين يتعاملون معها كأنها مادة من مواد البعد الثالث، هي ليست هكذا أبدا. قسم من المركبات الكونية وجدوا، لاحظوا ماذا وجدوا؟ وجدوا عليها بعض الرسومات، تمام، بعض الرسومات والرموز. مثل هذه المركبة وجدوها عام 1942 في شمال جورجيا بأمريكا، وهي صغيرة تقريبا 15 قدم. شاهدون الرموز؟ هذه أمامكم. هذه الحادثة يعني فيها ميزة، حدثت عام 1973. مجموعة طلبوا منهم أنهم يأتون إلى المصنع وأن يصورون ماذا موجود داخل المركبة، فمجموعة ذهبوا إلى مصنع سري، وصلوا يعني دخلوا هذا المصنع السري تحت الأرض، ووجدوا هذه الرافعة حاملة مركبة كونية. هاي الصورة طولها بحدود 30 قدم، لكن هناك أحداث أيضا نوضحها وهو يوضحها يعني بالمحاضرة أو بالمؤتمر. لحظة، أحد الأشخاص كانت مهمته أن يذهب داخل المركبة ويقوم بتصويرها، فهذا تصميم آخر للمركبة ثلاثي الأبعاد. شاهدوها؟ عندما دخلوا استطاعوا، هاي المركبة استطاعوا أن يدخلوا فيها، وجدوها كبيرة جدا جدا حقيقة. استطاعوا أن يدخلوا المركبة، والشيء الصادم وجدوا هنا أنهم عندما دخلوا المركبة وجدوها كبيرة جدا بهذا الحجم. في هاي الصورة أدناها، راح نعرض الصورة. وحتى أحد المصورين قال أو كتب بحيث إذا يرمي شخص كرة من جانب هو داخل المركبة، فهذه الكرة لا تستطيع الوصول للجانب الآخر، إشارة إلى مدى كبر هذه المركبة. نقول إن طبيعة، نقرأ هنا بس اسمحوا لي، نقول إن طبيعة هذه المركبات هي كبيرة الحجم، لكنها في البعد الثالث تظهر بالحجم الصغير، لكن من الداخل فهي تعيش أبعاد أعلى. فهذا داخل المركبة وهي سيلفر كبيرة جدا حقيقة. مدهشة. أي. فعندما تشاهدون الفيديو هناك تفاصيل أخرى حول مركبات أخرى وأحداث أخرى، وسوف نقوم بتوضيحها أيضا لاحقا، لأن هذا الأمر يجب أن يعرفه القارئ. يا شباب، إننا نعيش ضمن أكوان مليئة بالكائنات الكونية، وهذه الكائنات الكونية مهتمة إيجابيا بنا. الشيء المهم ملاحظته أيضا أن هذه الكائنات لا تملك أي سلاح أبدا بالمواجهة، هي فقط المواجهة تكون من جانب الحضارة البشرية، لأن السلك العسكري برمجوه على استعمال الأسلحة، وهو التصرف نابع من الخوف بما يسمى المقابل. جعلوا مبدأ واسم العدو دائما بالسلك العسكري، العدو العدو. خطأ، هاي التسمية خاطئة. هو برمجوا السلك العسكري على كلمات محدودة، وجعلوا هذا العسكري ذلك العسكري يعيش خوف، في حين أن المقابل هو كائن سلام آتي حقيقة لكي يحمينا، لكي يوضح للحضارة البشرية أن تتوقف عن الصراعات والنزاعات. أيضا يا أخي ويا أختي، اعرف أن هذه الكائنات آتية من كواكب أخرى وعرضت حياتها للخطر، لكنها تشعر أن واجبها ومسؤوليتها في إدارة ظروف الأرض والكواكب الأخرى. عندهم هو هذا حس المسؤولية، يديرون ظروف المجرات، نعم، الأكوان. وهذه الكائنات الكونية لديهم عوائل هناك، لديهم حياة كاملة هناك، ولديهم أهل، نعم هكذا بهالمعنى، يعني بهذا المصطلح، ينتظرون رجوعهم. حياتهم مثل حياتنا تماما. أطلب من كل شخص أن يصلي إلى هذه الكائنات أنها تعيش محبة وسلام وخير أبدي، وخاصة أيضا أن هناك كائنات كونية مسجونة في الأرض، موجودة محجوزة مسجونة نقول في مراكز ومستودعات عسكرية. سألوا الدكتور ستيفن غرير، عنده مقابلة لقاء، سألوه قالوا له هل هناك كائنات كونية أخرى محجوزة ومسجونة؟ فأجاب نعم موجود البعض منها، فنصلي إنها، وصلي معي يا أخي ويا أختي، نصلي أن هذه الكائنات الكونية باسم الضوء وباسم الأكوان العظيمة ترجعون يا أخواني، هيك نقول، ترجعون يا أخواني الكونيون، نعم نحن كلنا أخوان، إلى عوائلكم بسلام اليوم بهذه اللحظة. آمين آمين آمين. وهذه هي الفيديوهات التي أيضا تشاهدوها. الفيديو الأول، المقطع الأول، ويليام تومبكنس يتحدث مع كيري كاسدي حول تحريف الحقائق وتزويدنا معلومات غير حقيقية، هو مقطعين. فهذا المقطع الثاني أيضا نفس الموضوع. يعني الفيديو الثاني شبابنا، ويليام تومبكنس يتحدث مع كيري كاسدي حول وجود كائنات النورديك، وهنا في هذا الفيديو هو يتحدث قبلها، تجدوه في اللقاء أقصد، أن هناك بشريين في كواكب النورديك يعملون هناك، ووجود 6 أشخاص مع عوائلهم من النورديك موجودين في الأرض. الفيديو الثالث، كليفر ستون يتحدث حول إنقاذه لكائن كوني وإخراجه من وحدة عسكرية. والفيديو الرابع، كليفر ستون يجيب صحفي حول خبراته في الاتصال بالكائنات الكونية وما هي الرسالة التي فهمها من هذه الاتصالات والتي يريد أن يخبرها إلى الأجيال القادمة. هذا فيديو آخر أيضا لكليفر ستون يتحدث في لقاء حول كشفه لمركبة كونية، ويوضح أيضا طبيعة الكائنات الكونية. والفيديو السادس هو هذا المؤتمر الذي يوضحون فيه الظروف والأحداث من مواقع وتاريخ وأشكال المركبات الكونية بعد سقوطها. الكون العظيم يبارككم ويحفظكم إخواني وأخواتي أينما تكونوا.
Listen to what I'm saying. Every PhD on this planet, whether they're for science or for medicine, have been given incorrect information for thousands of years about the history of this not just this galaxy, the universe. They had been given information which was controlled by Draco, Reptilian, and other extraterrestrials not to know what was really going on. So every book in every university on this planet had misinformation about every field, every technical field you can come up with. Okay?
Yes.
You people have been told for a minimum of 6,000 years total incorrect information.
Yes.
From medical, from science, from history, from astronomy, from mathematics, you name it. Everything you've told.
Yes.
It's not.
I really appreciate you. Yes.
This is a lie.
I hear you.
Adding to that, you have solar warden. People don't believe that we have solar warden. Okay.
I believe it.
Okay, but it is 8 Navy space battle groups with destroyers, cruisers, other vehicles, support vehicles, transports, trucks, all kinds of stuff. They're operating off of Nordic bases. Okay? Their families, their children, live in Nordic facilities. They go to Nordic restaurants for food. Just like the 6 people in Lockheed, which are here, working, or they have their own facilities in an area in Burbank. Those 6 fellows have wives and children. They're in the public schools there. They go to restaurants and they
nobody
go.
knows their
And
names.
the manager of that 6 group, they are they have their own mission, which again is talking about this region of the galaxy, this arm, and so they could just as well have been on board the moon facilities, but they're local. And yes, once in a while they help the skunk works, but that's not their job. They're not contracted. And okay, he lives 3,700 comparable years, and so do the children, the wife. Okay, the children go to the schools, but every hour they put in class, they're being taught telepathically their own information, because they can finish a 4-year college degree by 9 years old. Mm-hmm. Okay? Sure. And they're right here in Burbank. Now, yes, we've got all this other stuff out there too that's being operated in the same manner. And those people are, they're not necessarily here as a contract to help Lockheed, but yes, they do once in a while talk with the skunk works, make side issues, make side suggestions.
And they're not cartoon characters. When you go ahead and have a visitor that we try to say is a guest, and I was involved in a certain situation where I helped one get to where his people could take him without hurting us. His big concern was, would he ever see his family again?
Yeah.
And, they have families. But, would he ever get to see them all? He knew that most of the people there that was guarding him was just as afraid as he was.
Yeah.
And he didn't want any of them to get hurt, because he could identify that while he had a family he loved, we had families we loved.
Yeah. So that
And-
gets into the story. You let one go, right?
Oh, yes,
This is
sir.
the Pentagon. Can you go through that story? Where do they keep the alien in the Pentagon? How do you get involved?
Okay, this wasn't at the Pentagon.
Oh,
this,
wasn't?
this was at Fort Belvoir, Virginia.
Okay. So the alien is there. They've
And the
got
alien
him.
was there. They cannot talk to him.
They can't talk to
They
him? Why?
can't talk because he's not saying anything. That's why they needed to get me there.
Oh, I see. I see.
I was going to be acting as the interfacer.
Okay.
As soon as I got there, they had, this little building, one level.
Okay.
It had maybe 6, 7 rooms on the inside of it.
Okay.
It was in the middle of nowhere, but it was there at Fort Meade. It had a fence around it, a security fence. You had a guard on the outside and a corridor walking up to the main entrance of the building.
Okay.
There at the main entrance, you had another guard. And then when you went through there, you had a little place where any weapons or anything that you had, any pictures, any writing material, you dropped it off there, went through another door, there's another guard, then you were directed where you were supposed to be going. But, that was a lot of places to go through if you were trying to get someone out. So I got back there. When I got back there, I saw our little visitor, and he looked up at me.
And what kind of being? What
He
type
was
of
in a
being that we-
typical Type 2 gray. Type 2 gray means
Well, how many types are there?
there were up to 3 types of grays.
Okay.
And the third type of gray isn't as small as what people think. It's normally 4.5 to 5 foot tall, just
Okay.
about like Corona was. But the Type 2 is about 3.5 foot
And so
tall.
he's there sitting in a chair, or what's he
He's
standing
sitting
there?
in a chair. He's sitting in a chair down like this. I'll never forget that. Then when I step in, he goes ahead, raises real slow, looks up at me, and no one else can, he's communicating. I hate the term thought waves, but that's the only word I can use to describe. I have to use words that I can, relate with.
You're able to easily communicate with him.
Real quick, and I mean, all of a sudden, he looks up and he says, "I am afraid."
Wow.
And when he says, "I am afraid," I feel every fear that little creature has.
And so what do you say back to him?
I go ahead and I said, "They're not going to harm you. And I'm here and I'm not going to let them, so don't worry." And he says, "It's not them harming me. I have a family. I miss my family. I want to see my family.
Okay.
I have children. I have that which you call a wife. I have that which you call parents. I have that which you call friends."
Yeah.
And we have that bond and we have that relationship like you also have.
Yeah.
And the situation is, if we get left behind or if we wind up becoming your prisoners, and I said, "They don't see you as a prisoner, they're calling you a guest." He says, "No, if I try to leave, they would have no hesitation to shoot me."
Wow. What year is this?
This is in 1969, towards the end of 69.
And this is this is an American crash?
This happened on American soil.
Okay. And then
And
what
it had
do
to
they
be
want you to
Virginia.
ask them? What's their intent?
They want the people who had me there want me to go ahead and ask him if there were more in the area where he was recovered. Because there was no craft there. It was like he was left behind by accident.
Wow.
So I go ahead and try to ask him, "Do you have any of your other friends here?" He says, "No. I was left behind because it happened on a military installation, and they didn't mean to leave him behind, but the military was getting too close. A strike team was sent out to try to find out what had went down in that area. And it wasn't a crash, it was a landing." So I go ahead and I say, "Well, they're not going to harm you." He says, "But, just like with you, if you were out and you were lost, they would have people looking for you to come to get you. My people are going to come to get me.
Right.
And when they come here, it's not going to be because they're trying to hurt anyone here, but by what they do to extract me from this building can have an effect where some of your people will be killed or very seriously injured. I don't want that to happen. If I stay here, they see me as a species of some animal there will be no hesitation to take my life.
Yeah.
And people say, you know, do an autopsy. No, we did dissections on these creatures
Okay.
because we wanted to see what they looked like internally.
Okay.
How much were they like us? How different were they than us? And it was okay because, see, the laws apply to the humans on this planet. There are no laws for our visitors.
Yeah,
So whatever
that's
we
right.
did to them, it was okay.
So you decide you're going to get him out of there.
I couldn't let that happen. I had a moral obligation to help him get out of there.
Okay, so what do you do?
So I go ahead and I tell the colonel, look, he's wanting to show me something, tell me something. But he's only going to do it with me here. Any other personnel here, it will not happen.
How many people are in the room?
And
Like,
I don't know exactly how many, but I know there's at least 10, 15.
is there a high ranking, like a general or?
Well, the guy that was in charge, I always called him the colonel.
Was he a colonel?
He was always in civilian clothes, so I don't know, but he acted like colonels.
So you see the
Me,
same
he
guy
was
at
colonel.
most crash sites?
Oh yeah.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that. You never knew who he was, though?
No, well, he went ahead and told me to call him Martin if I needed a name.
Okay.
You know the significance of Martin? Martin is the patriot saints of soldiers.
Oh, wow.
So was that really his name? I don't know.
Okay, so you tell him you want to talk to him privately?
Yes, and
Okay.
it took a little while to convince him.
Okay.
And I said, you know, the whole situation is if you'll just step out from the gate line, or the fence line out front, get everyone else out of here, because it may cause certain things to happen that may not feel very good, and I'm right here. And he says, okay. He says, but remember, the only way out's through that door.
Okay.
I said, I know, we're not going nowhere, we're staying right here. Well, I had another friend of mine, another Spec 5, go ahead and put wire cutters real close to the fence outside. It was a storm fence. So I went out and thought, okay, I can lift the fence up and pull the wire cutters through. Well, my friend threw them over, so when I got there, where's the wire cutters for this wire? But, you know, I could see them, you know. I picked them up and we started to cut the wire. Well, by this time, they knew that we had exited the back of the building. And the door was supposed to be locked, but it wasn't locked. And now they were chasing us, and I could hear people yelling.
They're chasing you?
Yeah, the military
okay.
personnel was.
Okay.
And they were saying, you know, to stop or we'll shoot. I went ahead, got it open enough where he could get out. I held it back and told him, go on through. And he says, what happens to you? I says, that's not important. You need to get out, okay? So he got on out. When he got on out, the people behind me, and I mean, it sounded real loud. It's not all that loud, but, you know,
Yeah.
where they were locking and loading rounds in their weapons.
Wow.
And they said, stop or we'll shoot, stop or we'll shoot. At that time, I was waiting to get shot. I was thinking, okay, tonight I'm going to die.
Okay.
Tonight they have no other choice but to kill me because I'm not going to do anything that's going to stop this little guy from getting out of here.
Okay.
But, you know, he got out. He was still concerned about me. Then all of a sudden, you didn't see the craft, but you saw this big bright light. Everything turned in day right in the area where he was at.
Wow.
And then it went out, and he was gone. Then they went ahead, came, grabbed me, pulled me down, pushed me to the ground, and took me on back in. And the guy I always called the colonel asked me what was I thinking of. Why did I help this creature to get away?
Creature, yeah.
And I said, you said he was our guest. He says, well, he was. I said, and we need armed guards for our guest. And he went ahead and said, you know what? You and I don't make these decisions. We follow orders. And I said, no, sir. I don't follow orders that puts other human beings in harm's way needlessly, particularly if those other human beings are innocent. He went ahead, says, that was not a human.
No.
That creature was not human.
And so what did they do to you? Did they court-martial you, or did
Didn't
they?
do anything to me. My response to him was, You know, that creature is just as human as you and I, maybe more so.
Yeah.
Particularly when it comes to its compassion, its concern for other living things.
Exactly.
We have a whole lot we could learn from them.
And you think that we should give all the bodies back? We should give all the beings back? Is that your position?
Actually, I think most of them have been returned.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
The whole situation, they have compassion for their dead like we have compassion for our dead.
Clifford, what key message do you have for us from your dealings with the ETs, and what would you say to the children of today who are our future about the ET intelligence?
We have nothing to fear from UFOs. We need to learn more. And once we learn more, it may go ahead and make us understandable how close we are and how much we have in common with, you know, the various groups of people, the Russians, the U.S., the Chinese, the commonalities that we have. We are not different races, different people. We're one race, the human race. And the situation, we have nothing to fear from UFOs. The day that UFOs are exposed as being a reality, the day we can accept that, the day that we can go ahead and have interactions with them on individual basis like you and I, it's going to be a wonderful day. It's going to open a whole new world to all of us. Not for the bad, but for the betterment of all humanity. And it will lead to a much, much, much brighter future. It will lead to a better tomorrow.
What an exciting time that would be, Cliff.
But did it have, like, how many fingers did it have? Did it have feet? Did it have ears? Did it have, what was the size of the eyes, if you could see that?
Well, the head was laid over like this way. Therefore, I couldn't really see, I could see the shape of the head. The head was disproportionate to the body. One arm was out like this and the other one out like this. I could tell it had fingers. There was no thought within me about counting the number of fingers. But I do know it had fingers. It had hands. The head was like, I don't know how to explain it, but, you know, like, it looked like it was 2 or 3 times the size of the head like what we would have on us. And it was more rounder, and the gray, it was a much dull gray to almost white because of the fact it was dead. Also, you could see the mouth. I'm going to say like a slit for a mouth, but I could swear it had lips. The eyes were closed. It had a very small nose, and you could make out something that was like an ear. Once again, when you're confronted with something like this, it's hard to explain. You're not trying to take notes. You're not trying to memorize, you know, what's going, because that's very human to be that way. All I wanted to do, I was seeing something that was assaulting my intelligence. And I, you know, could identify on a very human level the loss they felt.
Were the arms and legs in proportion?
Very thin. Very thin. And I got to say again, because most people, I hate doing it because you've heard it 1,000 times over, it had what looked like a silver suit on. And many of our visitors wear this. With that silver suit on, it was like a one-piece. From waist down, it was still inside the aircraft. So I can't tell what any of that looked like. I was picking up on the feelings these entities had. And if you're in combat, you'll turn from time to time and think about your family. And you'll think about, will my family know that I wasn't a coward, that I did my duty, and I died showing bravery and courage. And with them, they were on a mission here, and they felt the same way. And, you know, it's hard to explain. It's hard to go ahead and tell people you're feeling these emotions. I was feeling the emotions that these entities had. That's how I knew there was more than one.
So there was another one.
There were actually 3 on board this craft.
So what did the others look like?
A lot of the others I didn't get to see till the next day. They had this, what's called a low boy. It's an 18-wheeler, but the bed is flat and maybe 20, 30 foot in length. They took the craft out of the impact area, put it on the back of the low boy, covered it with a tarpaulin, tied it down. Then they were taking it out, but they had a gun jeep in front of this vehicle and a gun jeep in back. And I'm pretty sure after they got out in an open area that those gun jeeps turned into staff cars. But on the way out, they had 50 caliber machine guns on the jeeps.
How large was the craft, Sarge?
I'd say approximately between 25 to 30 feet in diameter. I didn't get to go inside the craft, so I don't know what it's like on the inside. But also they had these stretchers, and there were 3 of the stretchers, and I could tell that these were the bodies they took out of the craft. They pulled back one, and when they pulled back one, I'm looking at it. The eyes are closed. Once again, you could tell, like the nose. The ears, they didn't perk out like ours did. They were much closer in, but you could still see that there's a protrusion there for the ears. On the uniform, it had a red insignia. I couldn't make it out real good, but it was like a check mark, and like a quarter crescent moon going like this underneath of it, or actually going through the check mark.
It looks like a map of sorts.
Very well could be, but it could also be an insignia of the organization to which in their world they belong to.
The opportunity to join all of you today, and what I'd like to do is to give you the best possible briefing on UFO crash retrievals. We're not going to rush through this. We're going to take our time. I want to provide you with the references of where I got this information from so that you can do the reading on your own, verify some of these witnesses, and really make it come alive in your own heart. So let's see if we can get the screen to show up here. There we go. Okay, so a couple of quick quotes before we begin here. Number 1, because we want to get started here, UFO crash retrievals can't be real because if they were, I would have read about them in the local newspaper, general public. Number 2, there are not now, nor ever have been, any extraterrestrial visitors or equipment on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This is their press release back in July of 1980, and definitely these would be false statements. I want to give you a brief background on Leonard Stringfield, World War II veteran, was in a C-47, had a Foo Fighter sighting that conked out both of his engines. Those eventually came back on and he was able to land successfully. But from that point forward, he started collecting reports from military personnel, generals, air traffic controllers, later on astronauts, cosmonauts. These first-hand credible witnesses were coming to him over a 30-year period talking about UFO crash retrievals, the bodies, the debris, craft being loaded on 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboys and being shipped to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That's the type of people. Now, we also should mention that somewhere lurking out in the universe, there are 22 original bank boxes of first-hand witness testimony, which is really the Rosetta Stone for the UFO crash retrievals. This is something that needs to be run to ground here. Also, this is Leonard's publication, UFO Crash Retrievals, The Complete Investigations. And it's really a revolution and a revelation because this particular book, including Dr. Greer's crash retrieval witnesses, really gives us the first-hand knowledge from military sources, the inner workings of these UFO crash retrieval operations. So, we'll begin here. This is our first case. This is Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. It had not become Wright-Patterson Air Force Base until October 1947. And it's interesting because this is a gentleman who worked in records management, and he had a friend who worked at Wright Field, and this records management gentleman was told to deliver a message to a certain particular individual in this hangar. And he had a friend who was an MP at the facility here. And he said, I want to show you something. So he brought him to the far side of the hangar. Tucked in the corner was a 15-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. It was 7 feet tall. It had a series of rectangular windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft. It had arrived by a railroad flat car from Arkansas. That's how they actually got there. This is the original sketch from the report. This is the AutoCAD rendering. It gives you a real good idea. Now, keep in mind, there were no seams, no visible means of propulsion, no Zeus fasteners, no hex bolts, no hex head bolts as well. This was almost a completely seamless type device, almost built on the atomic level as a complete mold. You can see the dimensions here, 15 by 7 feet tall. I also want to mention that there was a central column on the center bottom of the craft that went from the bottom all the way to the top. You'll also notice, if you look at this technical engineering drawing here, there's a red dot. The red dot is the attempted point of entry that they were desperately using diamond tip drill bits, and it had no effect. So if you look through these cases, there's a historical legacy indicates very clearly that in many cases the U.S. military at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, at other locations, was desperately trying to breach the hull of these craft, and it had no effect with a diamond tip drill bit. Full color rendering. This is the craft here, full color rendering. If this would, hopefully it comes back here. There we go. Okay, so now we can see the exterior, kind of this chrome brushed aluminum exterior, and on the upper right hand corner we've cut the skin away that allows you to show this central column that went from the bottom of the craft all the way up to the exterior section of the top part of it as well. So here was the scene when he walked inside. There was a tarp that was folded up off to the side of the craft. In front of the craft itself, there was a toolbox and an electric drill with a diamond tip drill bit. So again, we hear this report that they were desperately trying to get into these craft with these diamond tip drill bits, and this is our final full color rendering just to give you an idea of what it may have looked like if you were actually there and saw it with your own eyes. Now, Papagos Indian Reservation. This is a little bit west of Globe, Arizona, within the vicinity of these Superstition Mountains, January 1947. And this was a gentleman who was in the United States Navy. They were looking for some particular property. So they're going kind of down this desert road. There's a rocky terrain. Off to the left, they are challenged by some military MPs, and this is what the sketch looks like by Rudy Gardet. I want to give him credit. And these guys are saying, you know, I don't think you're supposed to be in here. And then about another 200 feet off to the left was this interesting dish-shaped craft, 30 feet in diameter. It had a series of indented windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft, augured in at about a 30-degree angle, and they're looking at the entire retrieval operation from the very beginning. So what I want to do now, I want to take you to the full color rendering that gives you an idea of what this craft actually looks like here if we were here, within the vicinity of Superstition Mountains, just to give you an idea of what this may have looked like. Next one, so we want to do a 60-minute briefing on Roswell here. We want to keep in mind that the actual event began on the evening of July 2nd, 1947. So if we look at this map here, over on the left part here, you've got the touchdown site. Something interesting happened here at the touchdown site. We had fused green glass, and a completely seamless black box that was discovered by Lincoln LaPaz and Louis Rickett from the 509th Bomb Group. It's almost never talked about. There was a seamless black box found. We don't know today if that was ever opened up. Now, 5 nautical miles south of the touchdown site is the debris field. That's where there were 3 types of debris that we'll talk about in a little bit, where all these little debris were scattered over the Foster Ranch. Now keep in mind, the trajectory is from the northwest to the southeast. That's where I've got the arrows here. And you can see the second body site is just a little bit east of the debris field, where at least 2 bodies were discovered that came out from an escape pod. So we're still heading southeastbound. Now we've got the impact site. That's what everybody's familiar with. A grand total of 5 bodies were recovered and 1 was still alive. So what I want to do now is I want to take you to the site. This is what it looks like if you were there today. It hasn't changed much in all these years. If you went out there today, this is essentially what you'd be seeing within the vicinity of the crash site itself. Now, we are on the morning of July 3rd, 1947. We've got rancher Matt Brazel, and we've got 7-year-old Timothy D. Proctor. And what they discovered is a 200-foot-long trench that's about 12 feet across. And all of this debris, there were 3 types of debris. There was this very small, thin material, could not be cut, could not be burned, could not be hit or damaged with a 16-pound sledgehammer. Other debris, the so-called memory metal, where you could fold this up and you could crinkle it. And then when you let it out of your hand, it would unfold like liquid mercury and then settle back to the floor. That was debris number 2. Debris number 3 were these small and medium-sized I-beams with very intricate hieroglyphic writing on the inside wall of the I-beam. Those are the 3 types of debris that were discovered. So now, we already talked about the morning of the 3rd, so it's the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the evening of the 7th, and then the daytime retrieval operation began on the morning of the 8th. So whatever biological material was there, you can see was already starting to decompose. Now, what we've got here is the egg-shaped craft with a dome on top. That is the actual configuration. You can forget about a manta ray-shaped craft or a dish-shaped craft. It was a size of a Volkswagen, about 13 feet across, with a dome on top. There was a hull breach on the side of the craft. In the background, we've accurately depicted the 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy. And according to Don Schmidt, the whole entire operation took place within the vicinity of a windmill and water tank. Also, it's interesting to note that the 509th Bomb Group did not have a crane at the time, so there was an independent contractor from Roswell that brought in a crane. They lifted up the craft, put it on the 18-wheeler tractor-trailer, and now I want to take you to the next slide here. We're going to go down Main Street. You can do this route today. You can take this route today and follow the exact convoy that the Jeeps and the 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy with this egg-shaped craft on a tarp went right down Main Street. There were 2 paper boys that saw this. There were multiple eyewitnesses that saw this entire operation as it's going down Main Street. So we have those witnesses. Now, going into Hangar P3 Building 84 at Roswell Army Airfield. This would have been plus or minus 4:15, about 5 minutes plus or minus 4:15 p.m. on July 8th, 1947. They're bringing in the bodies. They're bringing in the small-statured, child-sized caskets that we've heard about from Glenn Dennis. That's all in this operation. You can see over here, we've got the crash site vehicle itself, and it's important to note that by this time, it was a chaotic situation. The first body flight had already flown out by Peppy Henderson in a C-54 directly to Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. So it's a real chaotic scene here. Now, next thing that happened, which isn't talked about very much, once they loaded up the caskets with the bodies, they put that into a wooden crate. That wooden crate was lowered into atomic bomb pit number 1 over at the base there, 519th Bomb Group. The next thing that happened is they put 2 perimeter screens around that bomb pit with MP stationed with carbides inside and out of each wall and told to shoot to kill anyone who would try to breach these perimeter screens. Now, I asked the question, all for a weather balloon? You're going to set up a perimeter for a weather balloon. Something's not checking out here. Now, how do we get this thing out of Roswell to 509th or Fort Worth, Texas, 8th Air Force? They had B-29 straight flush. So they taxied over the B-29 to the atomic bomb pit. They had a hydraulic lift that lifted the crate with the bodies inside the bomb pit of the cargo bay of B-29 straight flush, and then flew over to 8th Air Force, Fort Worth, Texas. That's how it went down. Now, we'll move on here. White Sands Missile Range, July 4th, 1947. So now we're getting into the same time frame as Roswell. This was a technical sergeant, U.S. Army Air Force, and this is page 196 is the reference. This all happened at night. This craft was about 100 to 150 feet in diameter, came in at a slight angle, and I want to mention here that it was excruciatingly well lit. They had searchlights, they had floodlights, they had people with Geiger counters, they had people with still camera photographs. They also had motion picture film reels going on. So they have this all recorded. This is something absolutely that was recorded. Here's the full color rendering that gives you an idea what it may have looked like. So something that we should consider as well. This is an actionable item that we've thrown in here. Since still photography and motion picture film was recorded of this event, senators and congressmen with the appropriate security clearances should track down and utilize this evidence for future public hearings. Absolutely, absolutely. We've heard so many reports of these things being caught on motion picture film reel, gun camera footage. This needs to be tracked down and brought into public hearings. Next one, UFO crash retrieval, 1947. This is at a warehouse in Berkeley University. Albert Bruce Collins, a metallurgical engineer, deceased now. He's the primary source for this particular information. He was at the right place at the right time when this 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboy backed in. He was this white lab coat technician. And as this thing was backing in, what he saw was an interesting egg-shaped craft. It was about 30 feet across, 15 feet high. There was a hole breach on the side of the egg, so it looked like a cracked egg with an interior yolk. This interior yolk was about 3 feet in diameter, and there was a composite panel bulkhead just forward of that interior sphere. Wrapped around the outer circumference of this sphere was another bulkhead. And then if you look closely, wrapped around the outer section of the craft itself was these two flat sections, and then off to the lower right was a hull breach with shrapnel coming out of the back of it. So this is either an implosion or it's perhaps something that goes into a much larger craft. So now we want to take you to the full color rendering, give you an idea what that may have looked like if we were there. So this is Berkeley University, 1947. Next case, Fort Polk, Louisiana, summer 1953. Herman Johnson is the name of our witness here. He was a private in the Army. This is case A1, page 80. And we've got the map, we've got the location, but I want to break this down for you here. This was another egg-shaped craft, 30 feet across. Now, one body was taken out of the craft on a stretcher. The other 3 ETs were helped by MPs. They were wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. They had a helmet on. They had what looked like mittens on, and they had no knee joints. So they had this very stair-step type maneuver when they were walking over the terrain. Also important to remember that the ground section where this craft impacted was still warm to the touch while this entire operation was going on. And that's the breakdown here. We want to take you to the full color renderings of what this looked like from our best available source here that we've described. Now here are the helmets. We can see the one-piece tight-fitting flight suits. And this is coming from these military sources. This is what these sources are telling us that they're actually recording and seeing. Here's the stretcher, the scene getting loaded into the ambulance truck, and then we'll do a blow-up to give an idea a little bit closer of what this scene may actually look like if you were there at the time. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Can you go in here? Let's see here. Working? There we go. Okay, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, 1953. We have this gentleman's name, Michael Olvey. He was a warrant officer. This is page 15, abstract number 8. I really like this one. Now, He was at the right place at the right time at night at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where a 4-engine DC-7 taxied up onto the tarmac at the base. Hangar doors opened up. I'm going to go ahead and take you over here. This is hangar complex number Bay E, which is hangar complex number 4. I don't know if it was the far one on the right. I'm not completely sure, but it could very well be. And this is what this hangar particularly looks like. So you've got this DC-7 that taxis in. They shut the door, and then this is kind of what it looked like. So just picture this scene going on inside the hangar. There was a port aft cargo bay door that was opened up, and they had a forklift there, and they were offloading these wooden crates. There were 5 on this forklift. The 3 crates on top had their lids removed, and he was about 12 feet away, and so he kind of leaned over and looked inside, and what he saw were 3 ET bodies. They were about 3.5 to 4 feet tall. They had a slit for a mouth, minute nose, oversized head, oversized eyes, all wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. One was female, and he said they were all being supported off the bottom of these wooden crates by a interesting netting that protected them from the dry ice freezer burn below. That's what he said. Now, he got a real good close look at this. I want to go ahead and move on to the full color rendering here. Gives you an idea of what this may have looked like, standing just a few feet away from this. Now, he was also told that other boxes within this DC-7 contain the debris from the crash retrieval operation. And then we'll move on to a top view looking down. Now, can you imagine if you're seeing this and you're only a few feet away? I mean, he saw the actual physical evidence in the form of the bodies here. Walker Air Force Base, New Mexico, April 12, 1954. Primary eyewitness served in the Air Force 1954 to 1955, and this is page 82 from the publication here. This particular gentleman was ordered to board this H-19 helicopter very quickly. He was a photographer for the Air Force. This is a nighttime operation. So they depart Walker Air Force Base, which used to be the 509th Bomb Group. They take a northbound heading. They make a left turn, and then they go another 20 minutes, and this is what they see. He ends up seeing this 40 to 50 foot diameter dish-shaped craft. It had come in at about a 45-degree angle. There were lights still rotating around the outer circumference of the craft. He also mentioned that when they landed the helicopter, and he got out, because he was in the close vicinity here, the entire vicinity of this retrieval operation smelled like battery acid. So that's a very interesting thing too. Now, during the retrieval operation, they found 4 deceased ET bodies. There were 2 additional bodies for a grand total of 6 still inside the craft. I want to take you to the full color rendering, and you can see him up in the helicopter here. He was taking photographs from the cargo bay that was open. So this is another case where they've got this physical evidence in the form of photography. Here's the full color rendering, shows you what it may have looked like. And as the helicopter landed, he also saw the retrieval operation beginning with all these trucks and jeeps and 6x troop transport were on the scene very quickly. December 1963, a couple of weeks after Kennedy was assassinated, November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, we had this particular incident, and this is a U.S. Marine. His name is Roy Baker. We have this gentleman's name. Page 152, case 2. So, he's at Cherry Point, North Carolina, and he's told to board a plane with blacked out windows. They fly 3 hours by plane from Cherry Point, North Carolina to an undisclosed location. And this is the map that shows you where they began the trip. And when he got there, they open up these hangar doors, and he sees this thing. It's propped up on scaffolding. They built a catwalk around this thing. It was 40 feet in diameter. It was 15 feet tall. It had approximately 9 elliptically shaped opaque windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft. And then again, you can see these red dots on the craft itself, and then also here on the seams that were so fully integrated into the craft itself, you couldn't even see they were there. These red dots are the attempted points of entry with a diamond tip drill bit. So this is the second time that we've heard of this. We'll move on to the full color rendering by Joseph Wraith to give you a good idea what this thing looked like. This is what the outer skin looked like. It had this polished chrome aluminum exterior. Now, there are 3 attempts to get in this thing. Number 1, they used a diamond tip drill bit. That failed. After that was done, they used an acetylene cutting torch. That didn't work. The final attempt was a laser, and that didn't work either. So, if we throw billions of dollars in classified black budget funding, and we try to add all the years together, you would think by now that they could check out and they could decode the metallurgy associated with these craft and integrate these into our modern stealth fighter aircraft. That'd be the basic goal here. Now, this is an original sketch by Roy Baker. This is not a copy. This is his original drawing from the Marine who was there, who actually saw it. He was guarding this thing there for a period of 2 weeks. We'll look up in the upper left-hand corner. You've got these light fixtures. The whole facility where this is all going down was excruciatingly well lit. Here you can see his rough sketch here of the scaffolding, and then the entire craft had these pads that were supporting the bottom of it for this wraparound catwalk. This is an original drawing by Michael Johnstone. He interviewed Roy Baker back in 1986, and this is his a little bit refined drawing. Now, if you look over to the left-hand corner of this sketch here of the craft, there was a 1-inch lip between the exterior of the craft and the exterior of these opaque windows. He definitely mentioned that there was this lip there that you could feel with your hand. Here's the cleaned up AutoCAD drawing that shows you what this thing looked like as it was propped up on the scaffolding, about 5 feet. You could walk under this thing, and you could walk completely around this craft to give you a really good look at what this thing looks like. Also, I've got the detailed view here that shows you this 1-inch lip that was identified by Roy Baker. Full color rendering, give a good idea if we were there back in 1963 December, what it may have looked like, just to give a visual aid here. Now, this was by John McNeil. This was our first attempt to get this illustrated. This particular Marine, his job was to guard it for 2 weeks, and he was told to frisk anyone who went into the facility. So that was his mandate. Now you'll notice here that there is a white circle painted on the floor directly below this craft itself. His job was to shoot to kill anyone who tried to breach that particular white circle. Now, I want to take you through a walkthrough of this facility as though we were a fly on the wall. And I want to take you through this chain link fence, and we're going to penetrate this facility. So now we've got through the fence, we're going to walk through this here as though no one knows we're there. We're the invisible person now. Now we can see the scene coming into view. We've got the guards there. There were some spooks in suits. They were there as well. We've got the catwalk. We've got military MPs with rifles, machine guns guarding the facility. We've got the white lab coat technicians that all had color-coded badges. We'll talk about the color-coded badges here. Now we've got a 45-degree look-down view showing you what this looked like from the perspective of a little bit high, maybe about a 45-degree look-down, and this white painted circle of doors is clearly in view now. Now the last day that he was there, he said that they were moving this thing up and out of this location. They were putting this on an 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboard, and they were moving it to the next location. So you can see one way that they keep these programs classified is, number one, they compartmentalize this information. Number two, they move these assets from one location to the next, so no one person knows the whole story. That's one good reason why it's been kept under wraps for all these years. Now, this is the framing work that they articulated around the craft, and then they started draping a tarp over this framework that you can see here. We're partially tarped now. And we'll move on to the fully tarp situation. This is what it looked like as they were getting ready to move out. Now we're getting ready to move to the next location. And then this is Rudy's drawing, just to give you an idea of how they actually moved this out. Now, there was an incident with a laser. Once the diamond tip drill bit failed, once the acetylene torch failed, they used a laser that came in by 2 tractor trailers with a large electrical device that was connected by 2 heavy gauge cables, went right to the side of the craft, And once they shone the laser on the skin of the craft, it bounced off and damaged the ceiling tile above. So a very interesting incident here. And you can see what happened. This is the gentleman's original sketch, the Marine from 1963. This is his original sketch of what that incident looked like here. Now, they absolutely did have 2 teams of white lab coat technicians that had these color-coded badges. So if you had a green badge, you could go here, but you couldn't go here. If you had a yellow badge, you could go here, but you couldn't go over here. If you had a red badge, you had access to the entire facility. That's how the badges worked. Now, there was one time where this particular Marine was at this location. Nobody frisked him, and so he was alone. And he had a small pocket Minox camera, and he took a photograph of this thing. And this is his direct quote: "Someday I will tell this story, and by God, people are going to believe me." Unfortunately, this photograph was lost in a flood in 1983. So we were this close to getting this piece of evidence, but it was snatched away from us. That always seems to be the case. We always get so close, then something happens and the evidence disappears. So we did a simulation of what this photograph from a Minox camera may look like. Something similar to this right here. A little bit brown, a little bit discolored in age, but something similar to what like this, if we could get this back in 1983. Now, there was an incident where a United States Navy personnel actually tried to breach that circle painted on the floor, and I tracked it down. It would have been this gentleman, Paul Nitz. He would have been the gentleman that may have done this. He probably had an inside knowledge of this, but not to the point where he could get into that interior circle. So there was an incident involving, we believe, this gentleman right here. Now, 4-star General Melvin F. McNichol, Base Commander, Tinker Air Force Base. How does he play a role in this crash retrieval operation back in 1963? What is his role in this? This is his obituary. Ex-Tinker Commander Melvin McNichol dies. The Daily, Oklahoma, July 11th, 1986. Well, he happened to be good friends with a woman named Charlotte Mann. She was intimately involved in the 1941 April Cape Girardeau crash retrieval operation. Actually held a particular photograph that's of interest. And so they started talking, and she turns to the general and says, "General, you know, we've been friends for all these years. We have this mutual interest in UFOs, and you've never told me anything. Are you still my friend?" And he turns to her and says, "Charlotte, if you ever repeat what I'm about to tell you, I'll deny it, and it could end my career." So he told her that, number one, he saw a UFO that was located in the west. That's interesting because the Marine stated that he flew from Cherry Point, Carolina, 3 hours by plane. That would put you in the vicinity of the west. Number two, this general said that he walked around a UFO on a catwalk, which was propped up by scaffolding. This is exactly what the Marine had talked about. In fact, he guarded it for 2 weeks. And then number three, this particular general told Charlotte Mann that bodies were recovered and one was still alive. This particular Marine in 1963 overheard during water cooler talk about bodies and one being still alive associated with another crash retrieval. So when I heard this from Charlotte Mann, I said, you know what, we got it. We got independent confirmation from 2 different sources that absolutely did not know each other, talking about perhaps the same event here. Now, next one, Fort Riley, Kansas. This is December 10th, 1964. This particular man, his name is Aaron Quebec, so we know the eyewitness. We have a 30-minute audio tape recording of this. He was serving the infantry, 1st Division. This is page 24, abstract 20. This is the map. This is Camp Forsyth of where this entire operation went down. This is at night, and he was told to board a 6x troop transport. They went to a clearing area, and when they got there, they saw this particular craft parked on the ground at night. It was 48 feet in diameter, 18 feet tall. It had a fin on the back of the craft itself, and then it had these square sections that were jutting out, wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. This is the full color rendering, first SolidWorks color rendering attempt at what this craft may have looked like. And then we've got Rudy's drawing here. Now they had a Huey UH-1 helicopter that was crisscrossing this field looking for additional debris, and once it illuminated the craft, now this gentleman could clearly see what was going on here. This was a retrieval operation. There was a man with a Geiger counter. He was walking around the craft checking if this thing was hot, so he saw this operation going on. Here's the full color rendering of what it may have looked like. Ground was still hot when they got there. And we'll go to the second view here. Now you can see this UH-1 helicopter in clear view with the spotlight shining down back in 1964. He also mentioned that during the retrieval operation, this is the M123 tank transporter that was used to move it from the crash location. Others who saw this going down Camp Forsyth stated that they saw people in biological hazmat suits associated with this particular crash retrieval operation. Southwest, July 3rd, 1967. This was a Marine. His rank was a private first class. Now, this is a Southwest location. This particular gentleman was guarding a Quonset-style hut. He had landed in an unimproved runway. Windows were blacked out. Off to the left, there were 3 tents. There was a kind of hastily constructed, prefabricated building and a Quonset-style hub. He was told to guard this particular facility, but by day 3, curiosity got the best of this guy. So he kind of went over inside, he pulled open this flap, looked inside, and he saw a very interesting craft that was 30 feet in diameter. It had a dome on top. Right in front of this craft were tables with instruments on there. There were calipers, there were different micrometers. It looks like they were testing the tensile strength of this craft. Off to the right, which you'll see over here, there was a walk-in freezer with body bags. He did not see any ET bodies, but this is what he described, and this is the full color rendering of what this may have looked like if we were actually there back in 1967. Probably Southwest, probably Arizona location, and you can see these workbenches with these calipers and micrometers, different tensile strength material. Norton Air Force Base, 1973. Air Force photographer. This is page 160, case 14. Now, this particular photographer, he was at Hawaii at the time. All of a sudden, he had his security clearance upgraded. He was flown from Hawaii to Norton Air Force Base, San Bernardino, California. There he was joined with another Air Force photographer. They go into this Air Force vehicle and they drive 1 hour from San Bernardino, California, and all of a sudden, the car stops completely. They drop down into an underground facility, and this is what they see. They both get out of this car, they disrobe completely nude. Now they're wearing these medical laboratory smocks, and they're led into this large underground facility where there's a crane. The crane has a netting, and it's supporting about 15 feet off the floor, a 30-foot diameter disc-shaped craft, and his job was to go inside this craft, photograph the interior. Now, when they both got in here, this is his direct quote. Keep in mind, this is 30 feet in diameter. I could have thrown a football as hard as I could and not hit the other side. So there was something going on in the interior of this craft that made it appear at least 10 times larger on the inside than it was on the outside. So some type of space warp, some type of continuum going on. This is something we've heard before as well. So something that looked to be about maybe 300 feet. Now, this is the full color rendering of what this retrieval operation may have looked like at this underground facility. You can see the craft being supported by the netting. We'll go ahead and move to the next rendering here. A little bit more of a blow up. Shows you what this may have looked like. And then I want to take you inside. This is what it may have looked like. If this thing was so large that you could throw a football, this may be what it looks like on the interior of this craft. So his job was to photograph all the interior display panels, all the interior components. Once that was done, they were also told to photograph 3 ETs that were involved in an alien autopsy. So not only did he photograph the interior of the craft, but he was involved in the autopsy as well. So we've all heard these reports that these underground facilities are connected by high-speed tunnel system. Is there any way we can back this up with any kind of evidence? So this is Los Angeles Times, July 1972, tube shuttle using electromagnetic suspension, LA to New York in half an hour, 10,000 mile an hour tunnel train plan developed. This is the cutaway that shows you how this thing works. They're using a vacuum to suck out all the air, and they can get this thing up to about 10,000 miles an hour. And this is in the early 70s by LA Times. Do we have anything else to back up this whole concept of these underground dumb facilities being linked up here? This is Project RAND. Proceedings of the second Protective Construction Symposium, Deep Underground Construction, and this is volume 2, March 24th, 25th, 26th, 1959. This is their own publication telling us here. This is what they're saying. Just as airplanes, ships, and automobiles have given man mastery of the surface of the earth, tunnel boring machines and shaft sinkers will give him access to the subterranean world. It is our aim to provide machines which will supply the ever-increasing demand in mining and construction of underground facilities. So in their own publications, the RAND publication, they're telling us that they're doing these tunnel boring machine operations. It's a done deal. We've got it in their own documents. Another actionable item here. Senators and congressmen with the appropriate security clearances should locate this facility, find out what is stored there, and what other underground installations this may be connected to. Absolutely. This is another case that was within Dr. Greer's archive. I want to give him credit for this one. U.S. Marine Corps diver off the coast of Okinawa back in 1991. They were detecting radiation at a depth of 1.5 miles below the surface. That's pretty deep. So what he ends up doing is he gets in a DSRV. They dive down to a depth of 1.5 miles. And when they get there, this is what they see. They see a triangular shaped craft, a little bit bigger than an F-14 fighter. It had been resting at the bottom, they thought, for between 40 to 50 years because they could see the silt buildup. So this thing was there for decades. They eventually did retrieve it, and the commanding officer, here's our full color rendering, gives you an idea what this thing looks like, believes it absolutely was an ET craft. There were hieroglyphic lettering on the side of the craft that they couldn't determine what that was. So this is an interesting case from the 90s. Now we want to move on to McClellan Air Force Base. This is 1973. Chris Coffey was a very interesting person because this particular individual was friends with test pilot Ellison Onizuka. This is page 153, case 3. This is Ellison Onizuka. Now, many of you might know this gentleman. Probably everybody is familiar with this gentleman. He was at this particular facility where they brought about 12 pilots into a briefing room. They shut down the lights. And then there was an Air Force general in the background who started a movie projector, and projected on the forward wall was about a 5-minute black and white film that depicted at least 2 ET bodies in an autopsy setting. And he was thinking, I can't believe I'm seeing this. Here you can see Ellison Onizuka right here. He was shocked at this. This was another independent source here talking about strange things going on at McClellan Air Force Base. David Armstrong claims his aunt used to work for a top secret UFO records library at McClellan Air Force Base. In his 20s, Armstrong went to visit her, and knowing he had an interest in the subject, Armstrong says his aunt let him take a look at the files. They had video evidence, they had photographs, they had documents, they had files on UFOs and UFO crash retrievals. So back to Ellison Onizuka. Leonard Stringfield was within 2 weeks of getting this gentleman's testimony, but he died on January 28th, 1986 in the Challenger incident. We almost got his testimony. We were about 2 weeks too late. And then, of course, here's Challenger. Now, I took the drawing and I took the testimony from Chris Coffey that came directly from Ellison Onizuka. I tracked down his widow, sent her a letter with the drawing. I never got a reply. So I don't know if she didn't get the letter, but she may have. It would have been great to get her testimony for the record as well. Source here is Air Force pilot, late 1950s time frame, Ed Comerick Jr. He conducted the interview. This is a 5 to 6 minute movie clip, and what this depicted within this interview is this Air Force personnel stated that he saw a 60-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. It had a hull breach on the top section of the dome where we believe the propulsion system came outside the craft. So this might have been a high impact. There were 3 ET bodies near toward the side of the outer rim of the craft itself. This is the blow up. It gives you an idea of what this may have looked like if we were there today. Now, we want to talk about the other Roswell. We don't want to talk about just cases here in the U.S. This is spring 1955, across the Texas-Mexican border around Del Rio, Texas. Now, we had a group of B-47s that were heading westbound. There were 3 of them. They were escorted by 4 F-86 Sabre jets. This is heading westbound over southern Texas. And all of a sudden, this dish-shaped craft comes screaming by their flight path. One of these F-86 pilots peels away from the group. He gets clearance to do that. He does a low approach over the crash scene. He flies back to Carswell Air Force Base, gets out of his F-86, goes to Corsica, jumps into a tail dragger Aranca twin aircraft, and flies back to the crash site before it gets dark. And he got a real good look at this entire scene. This is what it looked like when he got there. This disc was about 25 feet in diameter. The dome had popped off. You can see over here on the foreground right side is the Aranca. He came with a friend, and the Mexican military got there before America did at the time. So that's how this went down. Now, as it was getting darker, it started getting colder. And according to this gentleman, what these Mexican soldiers were doing to keep themselves warm is they were taking blankets from their truck. They were putting it on the debris from the craft that was still warm, pulled it off the debris, and then put them on their bodies to warm them up, which I thought was a very interesting point. Why would you make up such an unusual point? To me, that has at least the ring of truth here. So this is the testimony from Robert Willingham, Air Force pilot. He stated when he looked inside the breech of this craft, he saw 4 bodies with, quote, arms that looked like broomsticks. That's how he described it. Now I want to take you further inside, and we're going to show you what the full color rendering of the scene looks like. We've got the Aranca there, we've got the troop transport, we've got the Mexican soldiers there, and now we want to go inside, and this is what it looked like. It was a gruesome sight. This is not for the faint of heart, but this is what it may have looked like if they were actually there. Now, there was another crash retrieval operation that took place called the Koyame incident. I want to give credit to Noe Torres and also my good friend Ruben for doing the research on this one. A Cessna 172 took off from southern Texas, was heading southbound. Coincidentally, a dish-shaped craft was heading northbound. And this thing was going 2,530 miles an hour at an altitude of 75,000 feet, heading northbound. It dropped down to the same exact altitude of the Cessna 172, right around 12,000 feet, and there was a mid-air collision. Both craft came down. While all this is going on, the Mexican military is beginning their retrieval operation. But United States intelligence agencies, the CIA, the NSA, they're monitoring the radio traffic. So they're aware of all this. They got a good handle on what's going on here. Now, while the Mexican army is loading up this craft onto this 18-wheeler tractor trailer, they've got a couple of Jeeps up front. They have the craft now on the 18-wheeler, and they're moving it out. And all of a sudden, something bizarre takes place. The entire convoy completely stops dead in their tracks. And all of these Mexican soldiers are dead. They're outside the vehicle. They're slumped over on the steering wheel column. One guy's hanging outside of a door. They're all dead. There was some type of biological agent associated with this particular operation. However, American intelligence agencies, they knew what was going on. They had a reconnaissance flight that flew over this operation, so they already knew. So what they did is they took 3 UH-1 helicopters and 1 CH-53. They attached a lasso to it and flew it back to CDC headquarters, and that's how that went down. So these are the deepest of the black programs. When the United States military goes out and steals up from under the nose of another government a crash retrieval asset, the deepest black programs within these operations. These are the helicopters that were involved in the retrieval operation. 3 Bell UH-1 Hueys, 1 CH-53 Sea Stallion flew the CDC headquarters in Georgia. Now, this is the full color rendering of what it looked like if we were there. We've got the CH-53 taking this thing away, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the top view looking down with a 45-degree look-down angle. Just an incredible type operation. Fort Dix, McGuire Air Force Base. This is New Jersey, January 18th, 1978. Sergeant in the Air Force Security Police. This is page 131. Now, this is a nighttime operation. The morning of, there was multiple UFO sightings that were confirmed by General George Filer. So he's still alive. He can confirm that this beginning part of this operation absolutely did take place. Now, as this MP is making his rounds around the outer perimeter fence of this facility, he notices something coming out of the darkness, and he gets out his .45 caliber pistol and he shoots this thing. You can see that's what this X is over here. Whatever this was, it climbed over the fence and died over here at the McGuire Air Force part of the base, and it was at the unimproved deserted runway. That's where this being died, and this is the area of vicinity of where this actually took place. Here is the drawing that depicts what took place. This being was about 5 feet tall, had an interesting head, kind of that tapered to the top. Once they discovered the body on the other side of the chain link fence, they built a crate around this body. They sprayed this with a preservation chemical. They put the crate with the body into a metal container, and they moved that metal container into the aft cargo bay of a C-141 Starlifter and flew it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So we'll move to the next slide here. That shows you what this looked like at the aft end section of where this craft actually brought it back to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. UFO crash retrievals, 1942. So we're way earlier than Roswell here. We're 5 years prior to Roswell. And this is at an Army base north of Georgia that not even Leonard Stringfield knew about. And in this particular report, this craft was about 15 feet tall. It was 10 feet high. It had 3 levels. The upper level had this, if you look at the enlargement here, it had a display panel with buttons, switches, dials, kind of this display panel. The mid-deck had what looked like 4 bar stools wrapped around a outer type window that was directly in front of these bar stools. The lower deck had an entryway hatch that was again fully integrated into the craft itself. Now, as this thing came down, it damaged the top section of the craft and caused a hull breach. There were also 4 crew members that were taken alive. They later died, but they were about 5 feet tall, 90 pounds, and about large black eyes, milky white skin is what they look like. Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio, 1946. This is a young boy, Tex Martin. This is page 242, 243. His father was an electrical contractor, and they were working. He brought his son to the base that day, and something started happening here. This 6-year-old boy was talking to a janitor, and this janitor said, would you like to have a soda? And he asked his father, this janitor would like to get me a soda. And he said, yeah, go ahead, you can do that, you can do that. So this janitor gets this boy, he's only 6 years old, he gets him this soda, and concurrently while he's drinking his soda, there's a connecting doorway from the cafeteria inside the facility at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio, and he was at the exact right time at the right place. And as this door opened up, what he saw inside was a dish-shaped craft. There were other debris that were tarped on 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy trucks. That's what he saw. These are some of the very early renderings we did based on the eyewitness testimony. There were a couple of bodies kind of laying on the floor with body bags. They were covered up, and we'll go to the full color rendering a little bit here, but this is what this craft looked like, 20 feet in diameter. It had 2 raised sections wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft, had tripod landing gear leg, and then these bodies that were on these stretchers that he could just get barely a good look at that. We want to move on to the next color rendering here. If we were there, if we were this young boy that you can see in the background, what he may have seen as a reverse perspective here. Just incredible. So we're already prior to Roswell with this particular case. Carrot Patch, South of Salinas, California. This is July, August 1947. This was seen by two 19-year-old workers in a nearby field. Now, it had come down the night before. They didn't know anything about this until the foreman approached these two 19-year-old boys and said, you know, we've got something that came down here. We better take a look at this thing. This is the original sketch that went with the report. 9 feet in diameter, it was 4 feet tall. It had 2 sections of indented windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. And then we'll move on to the X marks the spot location. We've got the map of where this thing actually came down, just to give you a good idea here. Here is the AutoCAD drawing that shows you what this may have looked like. Again, 9 feet in diameter, about 4 feet tall. Here is our original sketch that gives you an idea. Now, when the military got there, within about 15 minutes, they ushered these 2 boys out of the location, but not too far away that they didn't get to see the retrieval operation. They saw the entire operation. They saw them lifting this craft up onto the trailer and moving it out of the area. So they got a good location. This is our full color rendering of what this retrieval operation may have looked like if we were actually there and could see this. C-119 flying boxcar. This is Sierra Madre, California. What he ended up seeing is he was asked by the United States military to aid in a retrieval operation. And so he did assist them. This is page 32. So they walk over to this C-119 flying boxcar. And how do we know what the diameter of this craft was? Okay, we can pretty much gauge that the diameter of the craft was 9 feet because the aft cargo bay of a C-119 flying boxcar is 9 feet 10 inches. You still need 5 inches of clearance on either side, so you can't be any larger than 9 feet. It was a relatively small craft. This is what it may have looked like as they were loading it up to ramp. This is the aft cargo bay view now. We're getting ready to load this craft in there. He said that there were at least 3 bodies recovered. They were burnt. In fact, he said that when he went to touch their faces, the skin came out and connected to his fingers. So it was kind of a gruesome scene, but this is our full color rendering of what this scene may have actually looked like here. And we'll move to the full color rendering of this particular retrieval operation. So very interesting case. It's within the Stringfield files. Another one of these good cases here. Now we've got Naval Air Station, Sunnyvale, California. This is 1950, Hangar 1. He was a radar operator. UFO crash retrievals, case B5, page 57. Now, this gentleman was also at the right place at the right time. He went through this double doorway, and what he saw, we've got his direct quote here, it was certainly no aircraft of ours. So as he's going through this facility, he goes through this double door and he sees this craft, about 80 to 100 feet in diameter. It had an upper dome, and it had a series of windows wrapped around the outer circumference of this lower dome section. He was challenged by the guard and told to vacate the area, but he did get a good look at this craft. Now we want to talk about this gentleman. Former military officer. He was at an unknown U.S. Air Force base in a classified materials library. This is page 212 to 213. So this gentleman is opening up this cabinet. There's a file that had specific details on UFO crash retrievals. There was a report and there was one black and white photograph. And I want to take you to this black and white photograph here. This may be what it looked like. The report said that this dish-shaped craft came down in Farmington, New Mexico prior to 1950. Farmington is very interesting in this whole case study here. This was about 36 feet in diameter. There was a slight pencil-sized hole on one of these porthole windows, and they did gain access to the craft itself. So that's important to note. Now, these are the key points to take away from this particular case. Number one, military officer had the correct security clearance, which gave him access to a classified materials library. Number two, report seen by witness made reference to crashes and that bodies were recovered. So now we've got more than one. Number three, in addition, Diamond-tipped drill bits and acetylene torches were used to gain access to the interior. Reference 1946 craft seen at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and 40-foot diameter craft guarded by a U.S. Marine during December 1963. 4 is important. Eventually, technicians were able to gain access to the interior of the craft by way of a small entry hatch. The report said, referring to the door, that it was almost as if the material of the craft liquefied and then solidified again. So here again is another reference to these hatchway doors, these different type of seams that are so fully integrated into the craft itself, you could not see where the seam actually is. Now, hundreds at Farmington report large force of flying saucers. Albuquerque Journal, March 18th, 1950. If anyone's done any research on this, this is an absolute watershed case because there were over 500 flying saucers that flew over Farmington at this time. It was called the Farmington Armada. Literally hundreds of eyewitnesses saw fleets of these flying saucers flying over, making 90-degree right angle turns. It was an incredible sighting. That coincides with what we have over here. During the early 1950s, there was a direct order from the United States Air Force to our pilots to shoot these flying saucers down. Here we've got shoot saucers down. Jets ordered in 24-hour alert. This is Cincinnati Enquirer, July 29th, 1952. Other newspaper clippings, and there's hundreds of these. Jets keeping 24-hour alert for saucers. Pilots ordered to down objects if they don't land. On the trail, on the saucer trail, pilots told shoot them down. Jets on 24-hour alert to shoot down saucers. So this would have been the aircraft that they were using at the time. This is an F-94 Starfire that they would be using to try to intercept these craft. And this is what it looks like if you go to the Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson. You can see off to the left, we've got the rocket sections concealed. Over to the right is the Air Force Museum, Dayton, Ohio, where we've got the louvers revealed, showing you where the rockets would come out for an attempted intercept. Now, what would this look like? It would look something like what we see here. This type of an intercept is what they would have been involved in back in the early 1950s. Call went out from the Air Force to our pilots. Now, this is interesting, and this came from a letter from Mildred Bissell, October 2nd, 1979. This is a letter to Leonard Stringfield. We'll go over this very briefly here. It says, I heard you speak at the MUFON Symposium in Dayton last year, and I am interested in your research on retrievals of the third kind. I gave a talk at a local library last week, and in the discussion period following, a fellow told me that when he was a gunner in the Air Force, he had emptied his guns on a UFO and had taken pictures with his gun camera that clearly showed the shells exploding against the side of the craft. He said the camera was taken off the wing of his plane when it landed, and the pictures developed. At 2 a.m., a couple of military policemen came and got him out of bed and took him to the base auditorium. They ran the 17-second of movie of the UFO over and over and questioned him and 2 other crew members until 10 a.m. He was warned never to tell anyone what had happened. He said he had a wife and family, a good job, and a lot to lose. He seemed afraid of the CIA and wouldn't even give me his name. So here's a report from an Air Force pilot absolutely confirming that he was there. He unloaded an entire magazine of shells on this craft. It hit the side of the craft, and they got it all on gun footage. So how many of these type situations have we had from World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, Desert Storm, where they have the gun camera footages? And where are these particular films now? Want to mention Marina Popovich, Soviet Air Force colonel, engineer, and decorated test pilot. Want to give her credit for coming forward to talk about this next case. This is page 245 as the reference. She mentions this particular gentleman. This is Major General Igor Maltsov, Commander-in-Chief of the Soviet Air Defense Troops, and he had highlighted a very interesting UFO encounter. This is March 21st, 1990, near Moscow. 2 MiG-23 jet fighters were attempting to intercept a 650-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. This is over Moscow back in 1990, confirmed by Russian military sources. Miami Herald, July 8th, 1990. So I started digging, trying to get some additional confirming evidence here. Soviets more serious about sightings. Over here it says, Maltsev also reported that jet fighters were scrambled and the pilots described a disc from 100 to 200 meters in diameter, flying at speeds 2 to 3 times faster than their aircraft, Holiness said. The general concluded that the UFO had somehow, and I love this part, quote, come to terms with gravity, and that it didn't seem to appear to be a terrestrial machine. So it had come to terms with gravity. That's interesting wording that we should keep in mind. Very interesting. Now, Great Lakes Naval Training Center. This is September 1973. This is a gunnery school operator, and he was told to deliver an important letter to a commanding officer who is at one of these Quonset-style buildings. This is page 89, case A7. So he's met by these two very strong, muscular CBMP types. They escort him down this corridor. They make a left-hand turn into another corridor. That leads to this large open hangar area. And when he gets in, he sees this craft. This is about 35 feet in diameter. It was 12 feet tall. It was a teardrop-shaped UFO. Could be a USO, unidentified submerged object. There was a ridge that went from the leading edge of the craft all the way up through the spine to the trailing edge of the craft, and there was a blue coronal discharge that was on the leading edge of the craft. Now, as he's walking in and sees this, he hands this letter to the commanding officer, and this is kind of a SolidWorks rendering of what this craft may have looked like, according to the witness report. This whole craft is propped up on a 2-foot-tall wooden platform. He delivers the letter, he makes an about face, gets a glimpse-eye view of this thing, and then departs the area. But he did get a good look at this. And there's a B section to this story, because 2 weeks prior to his encounter, he met a sailor. And this sailor told him that, you know what? A little while ago, I was on this missile destroyer, and we shot down this interesting teardrop-shaped craft that was about 35 feet across, and very interesting. It was brought to Hawaii, the mainland, back in 1973. And then he went on to say that none other than Howard Hughes's Glomar Explorer was used to lift this craft off the bottom of the ocean and brought it back to San Diego and then to Great Lakes Naval Training Center in Chicago. So now we've got Howard Hughes involved. How CIA divers retrieve Russian secrets. This is San Francisco Examiner, March 19th, 1975. This is part of that codename Project Jennifer. A matter of risk. The incredible inside story of the CIA's Hughes Glomar Explorer mission to raise a Russian submarine. So during 1973 to 1974, a Russian submarine was recovered from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The question is that all that was recovered? According to RK's informant, the object was retrieved by the Glomar Explorer, shipped to Hawaii, and then sent stateside and finally to Chicago. A sketch of the craft was drawn by the sailor, and according to RK, who is our source, there was little doubt that it was the same object that he had seen in the Quonset-style hut. So again, we had independent confirmation. Next case. This was an office worker at the Pentagon back in 1952. She had gone, perhaps in the basement, through these double doorways that said off limits, and now she's in this dark, dim, dusty room. There's a couple of cardboard boxes off to the side, very poorly lit. She kind of makes this turn, and she is met with the shock of her life. She turns the corner, and she sees a pickled alien in a glass jar. This is what she sees. Within 5 seconds, she feels this hand on her shoulder. It was an MP telling her to get out of there immediately. She had to sign multiple NDA agreements not to talk about it. Stringfield Research got to her years later, where she did talk about it very briefly. Leonard Stringfield got in a call to her. She didn't want to discuss it, and that was the end of the story. This is back in 1952 at the Pentagon, right down the road here. So that'd be interesting if we can get access to that facility. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, 1955. Mrs. G, very interesting case. She worked in the materials division Foreign Materials Division. This is page 17. And this is kind of the scene that we want to look at here, kind of the ending scene of Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. You've got this large warehouse. We've got all these crates here. This is the environment that she was working in. And you can see this is Warehouse Building 258. Now, what her job was absolutely critical to this whole account here. What she said, this is Mrs. G, that she was charged to catalog 1,000 components that came in from a UFO crash retrieval. Can you imagine 1,000 components? So what they had set up here is they had an assembly line. So I told Rudy, I want you to give me this assembly line. They had one person over here taking photographs of this debris that came in from a crash retrieval. Over here, they had a gentleman that was bagging and tagging this debris. And then finally, off to the right, you can see this, our worker here, she is cataloging all this debris. Now all this debris is going up into the shelving. So we've got 1,000 components from a UFO crash retrieval. Interesting quote, this is from Mrs. G. Quote, Uncle Sam can't do anything to me once I'm in my grave. 6 months later, she died. We just got her in time. She's an American hero. She deserves credit for coming forward and giving us her account. Now, this is the actionable item here. Since over 1,000 components of physical ET hardware exists, according to Mrs. G, this evidence should be tracked down by senators and congressmen with the appropriate security clearances and should be presented in open public congressional hearings. That's what we're fighting for. That's the crusade here. So next time you hear about senators and congressmen testify at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. and state that they don't have any visual or physical evidence of UFOs, be advised that they have been illegally denied access to the material. That could be what we're dealing with here. Reference 18, alien autopsy performed at Walter Reed Hospital. The cadaver was described as being 3 feet in height with a large head, protruding brow, sunken eyes which wrapped around the side of the face, very long arms, gray skin. This is pathologist report at the Cleveland Clinic back in 1952, 1953 timeframe. So if we take this pathologist report, we take his written report, we tie that together with all the eyewitnesses that have seen these bodies. What did these ET bodies look like if we were at a crash retrieval operation? That's the question. What do these things look like? These are the bullet items here. 3.5 to 4 feet tall, 4.5 feet tall. 2 round almond sunken in eyes without pupils. Heavy brow ridge. Large hairless head by human standards. No earlobes. No definitive nose, small slit for a mouth, very thin neck, small torso wearing a metallic flexible garment. Arms described as long and thin reaching down to the knees. Hands have 4 fingers without thumb, slight webbing. Short and thin legs, no toes, skin color beige, tan, brown, tan, pinkish gray. That's according to the pathologist reports, people who were on these autopsies. So if we take all this information together, from the pathologist report, and we put a composite sketch of one of these bodies together, this is what we're going to end up with, according to the pathologist report. I believe this to be the most accurate depiction of what these beings look like, according to the crash retrieval military witnesses and medical personnel who are on these autopsy teams. Very, very interesting configuration. We've got the large oversized head. We've got the oversized eyes. We've got the heavy brow ridge, emaciated frame, arms that go down below the knees, webbing on the fingers. It tracks with what these pathologists and medical personnel are telling us here.